the session that you intended to come to. This is room 11. It's co-organised by URID, the .eu registry and Oxford Information Labs. My name is Emily Taylor. I'm the CEO of Oxford Information Labs, an associate fellow at Chatham House, London-based think tank, and the editor of their Journal of Cyber Policy. We have a really wonderful set of speakers here, but really this is a format of a round table. So everybody is invited to and welcome to participate in the discussions. If you would like to take the floor, please just try and catch my eye or raise your hand. I'll keep a list and I will probably point to you if I don't know your name, and apologies for the rudeness, but that's how we will do things. Just one more slight housekeeping thing. We're extremely fortunate to have here Piers O'Donoghue from the European Commission. He has another engagement, so he will have to leave. That's completely expected, and everyone's totally happy with this. Okay, so so our objective today is to really frame our discussions around 4 questions. First, sort of sets the scene about, what is the environmental impact of all these technologies that we love to use and that are so embedded in our lives and our societies now. Then we will think about how businesses, government, civil society, what they're doing to reduce carbon footprint associated with these technologies. And we'll be hearing some good practices from our speakers there. And then we will think about, what are the environmental risks if insufficient action is taken, and then finally think in a practical and action-based way about what we all need to do to change things and to make things better, and what concrete actions need to be taken. So with that, I have great pleasure in addressing our first question about sort of setting the scene. We have 2 wonderful speakers, Mr. Piers O'Donoghue, who is the Acting Director for Future Networks Directorate of DG Connect at the European Commission, and he's responsible for policy development in aspects of the digital single market, including Internet of Things, cloud, and so on. He's previously been Deputy Head of Cabinet of Vice President Nelly Cruz, and many other roles within the Commission. And then we will hear from Dr. Sarah T. Roberts, who is an assistant professor in the Department for Information Studies at UCLA, Los Angeles, the United States. Prior to that, she was at Western University and completed her doctoral studies in the University of Illinois. So, Piers, could I just ask you to set the scene and let us know about also the regulatory frameworks that are in place? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and I apologise in advance. It's not that I am important, it's that somebody else important is here. It's a sign of how important the IGF is for the European Commission that my Commissioner, Mariah Gabriel, is here today and tomorrow, and she has an awful lot of meetings, and I need to be with her for some of those meetings. So that's the reason. But it does, of course, allow me to say some pretty ignorant things and then to leave the room, because the real experts are then going to speak about it. But perhaps that might... Therefore, I can prevent, in talking about the regulatory frameworks and our perspective, give an example of the dilemma that we are faced with. Because in the work that we do in the European Commission, we have a mandate to actively promote the use and take-up of digital technologies and services across all elements of society and all sectors of the economy, because of the improvements in well-being, the economic and social development that they can give, that they can share. And so that is a very clear mandate which we have without apology. It's not a pro-business mandate, it's actually a pro-society, pro-economy mandate. But the flip side of that is that we also have a mandate with regard to the environment, with regard to sustainable development. And that's exactly, I think, why it's so welcome that you're having this round table. So in our regulatory frameworks, our environment policy, our attempts to reduce waste, to introduce targets and then in some cases obligations with regard to energy efficiency, to the use of sustainable resources, they have been relatively evident, but what hasn't been evident is how we have actually mainstreamed those issues into our technological development policies. So some of the things that we have been working on, and we have to be careful now about talking about regulatory frameworks, because we don't have a lot of rules. We have a lot of work. We start upstream in actually helping to fund public research and research from independent organizations who develop the technology or the standards to actually ensure that the hardware, first of all, including all of the what seems to be now relatively disposable consumer hardware, is actually more sustainable. That there is a clear recycling path. But more importantly, from our point of view, it's the materials that go into the products, and it's, of course, the production techniques themselves. But even that, quite rightly, has led us to be criticized because we haven't focused on what could, at the end of the day, be considered to be a massive drain on the environment, which is perhaps the leaking boat at the moment, and that is the use. What happens when all of these technologies that we are promoting actually get used, maybe overused? So in terms of any of us now using any of the devices that are in front of us this minute, it's very hard actually for the average consumer or even the average bureaucrat, such as myself, to actually understand in transactional terms, what does that actually mean every time I do a Google search or every time I do something more detailed? Somebody who's working in industry, who is actually doing some computational analysis from a work site, and that's going back to a data center. What exactly is the impact? And I know that there are experts here who are much better able to say that. And this is where we have actually started working with the experts, the people who know, including in funding research, to actually work out better ways, particularly in the design of networks. The cloud, which is something which I work a lot on in terms of cloud computing, we really need to ensure that we push what the technology is already allowing us to do, which is a thing called going to the edge. So edge computing means that you have much less literally messaging and transactions for one computational analysis to be done. There are very simple things which, if you look at what the industry does for itself, for its own cost reasons, at audiovisual services, at the caching of the most popular video of today, the most popular Netflix series, if you cache that in a server close to where the consumers are, then you have much less two-way transactions when 10, 50, 100 different consumers seek to download or to stream that particular item. So moving to the edge, using fog computing is a way of getting away from highly centralized, highly power-hungry and resource-hungry data centers. But at the same time, behind every silver lining, there may be another cloud. So we still have to work out, actually, is that the most efficient way of doing it? And should we not perhaps be going to another direction and pushing the industry to put more intelligence back into the device so that there is less transactions in terms of messaging and data downloads and uploads? So what I did say, though, what is important is that when we come to talking about regulatory frameworks, certainly in the European Union, we have not sought to address this in terms of rules, of mandatory obligations. Increasingly, we are going to have to do it in the standardization field. So just as we are busy on cybersecurity standards, the real challenge to us would be to, well, you also have to talk about standards with regard to the power consumption and the environmental friendliness. So this is one of the challenges that we have. And the last point I'll make is that, of course, we do have a role and a responsibility, given the way that we are structured, to actually serve as a relay for information, to give greater awareness to people, to make it easier for the individual or the small business, who are also vitally important in this, to make the right decisions, to be informed. And that's also, from a regulatory point of view, a reasonable and relatively light-handed way of putting obligations on everybody in the life cycle of the product, of the service, everybody in industry, in other words, to put obligations on them which, particularly if they work together, will actually be very light in terms of cost and regulatory burden, but could have significant benefits in educating and improving the system, so that we do come to a situation where it then becomes a market identifier. It's not just something we talk about, but labeling and recognition by business purchasers of services and consumers that actually pushes the system to become virtuous in terms of its environmental footprint and the way that we deal with waste. So thank you. Those are my few thoughts.
Thank you very much, Piers. Could I just ask one follow-up question, really? I'm thinking about the way that the Commission is approaching issues like privacy or security, is the sense of, trying to embed it in the development process. Are you thinking about making sort of similar type of moves in, environmental by design as well as privacy by design or security by design? Do you think that could be a possible way through? I'm sort of jumping to the end in a way because I know that your time is limited here today, but I just wanted to just hear some thoughts. I'm not asking you to make any firm commitments, but just sort of floating ideas.
No, of course, it's a fair question, and how do we think about these things? The truth is that no, we are not actively considering such a move. If we were to do so, it would in any event require an awful lot more preparation and work in terms of how we would do it and what would be the impact. But in the research that we are supporting, actually funding, this has now become a core component of some of the work programs that we actually roll out, and we ask the academic and the independent research institutes to actually address in the research programs that they fund or that we co-fund. And of course, we are already working in a number of areas on industry best practice and industry codes of conduct. And that's something which did work at the beginning of what would have been our environmental regulatory policy. And therefore, we think when we mainstream those considerations into IT, it's something that would also work for us.
And just a very, very quick one, which I think I'd like all of the panel in a way to think about or to address if you can, is what sort of level of awareness do you think there is amongst the public that these things here, that our activity online has any environmental impact whatsoever? Oh, sorry, Sarah.
I'm going to stop talking because I'd love to hear Sarah and others talk about that, because I have a lot to learn, and that's the answer, is that the level of awareness we have realized is very, very low. In fact, there is even misinformation, which I think as a consumer I also suffered from, is that I felt that I was actually doing something good by putting everything online or going onto the systems and not realizing what footprint it had. And what is worrying for us is that as we push industry, but particularly small companies, they don't have the resources to be constantly monitoring this, so they will take off-the-shelf solutions that are provided, and they are not aware either of the impact which it has.
Thank you very much, and sorry to bombard you with questions, and also to preempt Sarah's talk.
So
okay, to your talking about. So with that, I will move straight to our next speaker, and I'm incredibly excited to have Sarah Roberts, Dr. Sarah Roberts, with us today from the University of LA, Los Angeles in California. Sarah and I have been in correspondence over many issues for a number of years, and this is actually the first time we've met in real life. But Sarah, please look forward to hearing from you, and then obviously if we have any questions. And Sebastian, sorry, I forgot to mention and to introduce Sebastian Pensis is our remote moderator today, so do just let me know if there's any questions coming through from the remote participants, and welcome to the remote participants as well. So Sarah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, my first time at IGF. And I have to say that my participation here on this particular roundtable is as much for me to also learn as it is to share a bit about some of the thinking and concerns that are happening in the academic world around the issue of environmental impact of digitization. And I'm indebted to a number of colleagues in this area who are working at the vanguard. I'd like to just acknowledge them, including Dr. Mel Hogan of the University of Calgary, who is an environmental communications professor and does a great deal of work. And I did consult with her before I came today to make sure I had my facts straight. I wanted to talk a little bit about a tendency within academic research around the internet of the past few years to do what I would describe as unveiling the internet's materiality, and this is a tendency and a shift and a concentration of research that is, I think, would prove very valuable to these discussions. It really is a function of working at the level of metaphor. So much of what we talk about when we're thinking about the internet, the cloud, for instance. I mean, it's just a metaphor. It's a representation. And of course, that representation is intended to do a number of things, or at least it certainly has consequences, such as suggest immateriality, a light footprint, location in actually the stratosphere, perhaps, when in fact research by many of the people that I'm tacitly referencing today has gone to show that there are incredible terrestrial consequences and implications of our vast push globally to digitization, to include things like massive networks of undersea cables, the production and dismantling or destruction of devices, of hardware that goes on globally on a global circuit. The questioning of these pervasive metaphors like the cloud, or just to show my own age a little bit, I think back to when we talked about Ethernet, which, if you remember, Ethernet was a cable, very much not ethereal in any capacity. The cloud, of course, is another word for data centers that are vast and located around the globe, in the United States, but more and more around the world, in the North Pole, for example, and elsewhere. So I just thought it might be helpful, it was helpful to me anyway, to situate today's discussion with some easy to grasp facts that really crystallize the issues for me. And I'd just like to share those briefly. Again, I'm indebted to Dr. Hogan for much of this information. So one Facebook data center uses as much energy as a U.S. town of 25,000 people. That's just one. There are many more than one Facebook data centers around the world. Here's one that speaks to something you mentioned, which is a few Google searches uses the energy equivalent to that needed to cook an egg. And so I was looking last night, I was preparing my remarks. Of course, I'm jet lagged and everything. So I was up late and I dialed up a statistics site, and it was just a little after midnight, and there had already been 180 million Google searches conducted. In fact, there are about 3.5 billion conducted per day. So that's a lot of cooking of eggs that we could be doing. Global data centers in toto used 3% of the world's total electricity last year, which is nearly 40% more than the entirety of the United Kingdom. And consumption for those data centers is expected to double in the next 4 years. But of course, that's just the electricity piece. These centers and facilities are highly resource dependent in other ways. And I'm thinking here again of work by Mel Hogan and Tamara Shepard, thinking about the amount of water needed for cooling that circulates through data centers located in the American desert of Utah, a highly water restricted part of the country and world. And of course, vast amounts of geographic space are needed for our spaceless storage facilities in the cloud. And I think your point, just to go back to the notion that many consumers are totally unaware of this impact, is so very true. We are in a rarefied space, of course, today, talking among people who have expertise. But I know even in my own family, my mother repeatedly asks me, and I'm gearing up for it again when I return to the United States for the holidays, what is the cloud? What is the cloud? And she asks, fist shaking, because she can't get her head around it. And if I were to share this with her, I'm not sure that would elucidate the matter for her at all. The final thing that I want to tie my remarks to, and then I'll cede, is to say that my own research focuses on labor practices in the digital realm, and specifically on a practice I call commercial content moderation, which is the work that typically third-party intermediaries located around the world do on behalf of major social media firms to adjudicate, review, possibly delete, and make decisions about what content should stand and what should be removed from these social media networks. And the reason I bring up this practice is not simply because it's the thing I know way more about than what I'm talking about this morning, although that's certainly true, but to note that as I've followed the evolution of this labor and its growth over the past 8 years, I've followed a trajectory of labor being outsourced from its points of origin and its expected points of destination all over the globe. And of course, that labor outsourcing comes at all of the same kinds of costs that I've just described, because it circulates on the very networks and is reliant upon the very infrastructural systems that I hope I gave you a sense of in my in sort of fast facts portion of the talk. And it's important to mention this because these labor costs, what I would argue are labor costs, are often rendered totally invisible or inaccessible if anyone were to calculate the true cost of labor outsourcing, because of course we know that this labor circulates globally in search of the cheapest labor possible, which means that in the cases that I study, it's often leaving the United States for places like the Philippines, for India, for Poland, for other places around the world where labor can be had much more cheaply. And yet, I would argue that a full cost analysis has not really been undertaken if we neglect the environmental impact of the outsourcing of that labor. And I guess the last thing I will do is draw a metaphor of my own, if you'll indulge me, which is to talk about the fact that as I've watched these circuits of labor, on the one hand, I was startled, and I guess on the other hand, not surprised to note that these trajectories are following very well-worn and old circuits of global commerce and circulation that go back to, of course, colonial powers and domination. So when we see the effects of labor going from the United States to the Philippines, it's not by happenstance that it goes there, right? It's because of these long-standing colonial and economic relationships between the United States and the Philippines that I would claim have often favored the United States over the Philippines in that relationship. And at the same time, as this, what I would call digital detritus, makes its way to these parts of the world, we see barges of garbage traveling these same circuits, these same routes, going to these ports. Just a couple years ago, a Vancouver company that claimed to be in the business of recycling sent massive carton ship loads of medical waste, adult diapers, other kinds of garbage to the Manila port, tried to sneak it in to Manila and dispose of it out of sight, out of mind from its clients in Vancouver, where it stayed in a purgatory as Filipino people rightly demanded that it be repatriated to Canada. So in very much the same way, we can see a digital circuit replicating and repeating these patterns of the outsourcing of the world's garbage to places that typically can ill afford to take it on, and they of course do it on the backs of their own population when that material has often not originated in these locations at all. So thank you. I'll leave it there.
Sarah, thank you so much for giving us that, fact-filled initial remark. And Piers, thank you very much for your participation and in the discussions. Piers has to leave us now for those remote participants. Sarah, I mean, you've covered not just the electricity that is used, the use of resources in terms of water, for example, for cooling in data centers, the labor costs, and it sort of it supports the remark that Piers made about the leaking boat, in a way, of the environmental impact of these technologies. And I think for your mother, I saw a bumper sticker which said, which had a cloud on it and said, "There's no such thing as the cloud, it's someone else's computer." So I want to come back to you, and I want to involve you in the discussions. First, I want to move to a sort of we've heard about the landscape, we've heard about perhaps a surprising story about how polluting not only the devices are, but also the uses are. I'd like to introduce our next sort of suite of speakers, if you like, who are going to talk about various projects to either reduce environmental impact of ICTs or actually find out more about what the environmental impact is. Our first speaker and dear colleague is Giovanni Seppia of URID, who's the External Relations Manager since 2007. A decade at URID, prior to which he had a number of roles, including at ICANN and as general manager of CENTER, which is the CCTLD, or the Domain Name Registries of Europe umbrella organisation. He has also worked at the Italian Punti registry before that, so a wealth of experience in the domain names sphere. Giovanni's going to talk to us about URID's work to reduce its impact as a domain name registry. And then we will hear from Mohammed Amin Hasbini from Kaspersky. Amin is he is a senior security researcher in the global research and analysis team at Kaspersky. Prior to that, he was at Deloitte & Touche. But he's also, and one of the reasons that we wanted to hear from Amin today is he's very much involved in the Dubai Smart City project and is in fact a board member at Securing Smart Cities. So I hope that we'll be hearing about the Dubai project and the environmental impact there. And then we're going to hear from Carolina Aguera, who is a researcher at the University of San Andres in Buenos Aires, at the Technology and Society Center. She's also a visiting lecturer at the Catholic University of Uruguay and has spent many years as the general manager of LACTLD, which is the CCTLD organization for Latin America. So these three speakers will sort of guide us through the kind of practical impact stage. So may I ask you, Giovanni, to make your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And again, big thank you to Sarah, because with very simple words, you explained to us what you call the internet materiality. And I'm been really fascinated by the way you explain in really layman terms to us the internet we enjoy, how much impacts the environment on a daily basis. URID is as Emily was saying, URID is the registry operator for the .eu top-level domain and its equivalent in Cyrillic. We are based in Brussels with regional offices in 3 other cities in Europe. And what we have started to do in 2010, 2011 is to think about the impact of what we are doing, how it impacts the environment. And what we decided is to have a sort of umbrella under which we could have organized and plan our activities in favor of the environment to reduce our impact on the environment. And this umbrella is the EMAS registration system. EMAS is a voluntary registration system which was launched by the European Union almost 25 years ago. It helps any company in any sector to manage its environmental impact and also to plan actions to reduce the environmental impact of the activities. Again, it's a voluntary scheme, so that's a bit tricky because it's voluntary, so you decide yourself how much you want to act in favor of the environment, but at least it helps you to set objectives in favor of the environment, and thanks to regular yearly audits, it helps you to measure how you improve your actions in favor of the environment. So we have started in 2011 this process. In 2012 we became officially EMAS registered, and we are registered with our office in Brussels and the other office in Pisa, and this year we are going to have also our regional office in Prague registered through the EMAS scheme. We have set quite ambitious objectives since the beginning to reduce our carbon footprint, and since 2013 we have also started the official process every year to assess and audit our carbon footprint and to buy official credits to offset the carbon footprint. The first years, I must say, they have been extremely bureaucratic. And I was a bit worried by all the papers the auditors were asking me to print, because I was saying we are doing a lot not to print papers, and then we have these external auditors asking me to print all these million of papers. And what I was doing is I was asking the external auditors to print the papers at their home, so we wouldn't have increased the number of papers in the offices, and that's what they did after 1 year. But it took me 1 year to convince them not to print the papers, at least in my offices. And so it was a quite bureaucratic and heavy process at the beginning, but then it became much smoother and much more efficient. So since 2013, we completely offset our carbon footprint, which is audited every year. So by July every year, we offset the carbon footprint of the previous year. And we do it via official projects to compensate our carbon footprint. The latest one is a borehole project in Uganda to help people to find clean water at close distance from where they live. And it's an incredible project. We get involved, we receive pictures, we follow via our social media, and we follow by correspondence to be sure and see ourselves what is implemented with the official credits that we buy to compensate our carbon footprint. But I would like also to speak about something very practical today, because you have seen downstairs there are, I think more than 100 booths all around this place. And think about the impact of one booth only. So as an internet company, we do attend fairs and events, and we do build ad hoc booths, or we just have a presence at these fairs. And every time we do that, in the past we were not much thinking about the environmental impact of what we were doing. And in 2011 we have started to be really careful about that. So if you go to our booth downstairs, we have a nice booth corner. Everything there is sustainable. So you see that the booth is organized in a way that there's some sort of green grass, plastic, but this is a sustainable plastic. And there is our logo, which is made by sustainable foam. And there are some nice gadgets that are distributed, some merchandise, which is all sustainable. And there is one which we are very proud of, because few years ago we have counted how many roll-ups we have been using in the past, and we ended counting more than 50 roll-ups that were produced for specific events and were stock in junk rooms in the different offices, and we knew we would have never used them again because they were for specific events. And we asked around, what are you doing with these roll-ups? And surprisingly, most of our industry peers or companies, producers of those roll-ups, they told us, well, we recycle the bottom and the upper part, but then the rest we throw it. And so we were a bit, surprised and disappointed to hear that, and we started thinking about what we could have done with those roll-ups. And we found a nice company that is a company made, it's a company based in a jail, in a prison in North Italy, and they are specializing in recycling different kind of goods. And so we contacted them, and we told them, we have those roll-ups. What can we do out of those roll-ups? And they said to us, send everything to us, and we'll find something for you. And there are some nice little purse bags downstairs at our booth. Those little bags and purses are made out of the roll-ups. So they have recycled those roll-ups in a nice way. I must say, some of them, they look like Gucci. They are not Gucci. But they look like Gucci because this company is very professional. And so it was not only an environmental project, but also a social project, because we gave some work to those people who have to spend some time in jail because of what they have done. And they were extremely happy to have a special project. And so we started to use this company more and more. So we produced a lot of rucksacks with unused T-shirts from other events. We have done so many projects with this company, and we are really proud to have this partnership. And this is just one example. And I think one of our primary duties is to make sure that we always share this kind of best practice with our industry peers, but not only, like today at this workshop. And for your information, if you'd like to know more, as I like also to leave the floor to the other speakers, and I'll be happy to answer any question. We have a specific section on our website, uri.eu, under About Us, where you can learn more about our environmental policy, as well as all the projects that we have supported, including the recycling projects and including the projects that we have supported to compensate our carbon footprint. So to me, this is one of the most exciting parts of my job, because I feel much better since we started this process to reduce the materiality, to catch up on what Sarah said, or what we are doing, which is something that, honestly and very unfortunately, many of our industry peers, they don't think about, but which they should start thinking about. So thank you for the opportunity to share this, and I'm happy to answer any question, and I leave the floor back to Emily.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, and that you anticipated what I was going to ask next, which is we've got a lot of information coming at you, but this is a round table. And so I'm very keen to, first of all, just raise your hand if you would like to make an intervention at this stage, if there's any questions that you'd like to ask or points that you would like to make in response to what you've heard. Please do take that opportunity. So would anybody like to ask a question or make a comment at this stage? Or Giovanni?
Please, if you have 1 minute, just pass by our booth and get one of these little purses. They're really nice. It can be a really nice Christmas gift. So please.
Thank you. So if there are no questions, I'd just like to follow up very quickly, because I'm keen also to make the best use of time and to move on to our great speakers as well. But Giovanni, you mentioned that some of your colleagues are perhaps not as active or as aware as URID is in this space. Could you give us an impression of how many other registries are making this sort of effort to reduce their carbon footprint or their environmental impact, and what might change things?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. It's a good question. From the data I have, and from what I heard, if I take just Europe, out of the 55 registries in Europe, I believe between 10, 15, they regularly assess their carbon footprint and compensate it. So it's really still a small percentage.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've got many more questions for both of you, but I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Amin from Kaspersky, who's going to talk to us about the Smart Cities project. But we had a discussion in the corridor outside also about blockchain, and I'm going to ask him also to elaborate a little bit on the environmental impact of some of the technologies that we're getting very excited about. So, Amin, the floor is yours, and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Well, I'll start my discussion with a little bit of introduction about the UAE environment, the UAE aspects in Dubai. I live in Dubai now, and there are special circumstances that cover UAE that are worth mentioning. I'll also move towards the technological side of things, how technology is actually affecting UAE, and then towards some of the newest technologies that we are extremely interested about, like blockchain. So to start, UAE is a small country, more or less, and they have more or less a single resource of energy, oil and gas. And oil is actually extremely polluting, and it's very difficult to just deal with oil and gas without affecting the environment. In UAE specifically too, they have no water. So that's also another issue, which means that clean water comes from water treatment facilities, which are extremely polluting to the environment too, and require a lot of efforts to just control the pollution emissions, etc. In such an environment, another resource that I haven't mentioned in UAE, resource of energy is solar, the solar power. And there is a lot of solar power that is almost never ending. Probably they have 360 days a year of full solar power. And that's one of the main important aspects being utilized immediately right now and being planned for the future. UAE has plans to go to around 25% of consumption of the whole country with 10 million, currently 10 million people. 25% to be solar powered by 2030 and around 50% to be solar powered by 2050. And these are probably numbers that could be better, though we see a lot of progress happening in UAE, and probably these projects could happen faster. They should happen faster, actually. We haven't discussed specifically the goals of going green. One of the things that I find confusing when discussing going green or green energy is, what are our goals? So a lot of people would talk about going lower on emissions, on the impact on the impact of using energy like gas, nuclear, etc., electronics through recycling, but we don't talk much about giving back to the nature. We have a lot of damage that's been happening for probably hundreds of years now, and we need to fix that. And we are now still in the negative, and we talk about going lower on emissions and lower on the pollution impact, and that's still in the negative. We need to start going into the positive, where we are giving back to the nature, we are filtering and cleaning water and the air that we are breathing, and that's ultimately towards our own benefit. Mainly because we see that we are able to live longer and prosper better with less pollution. In UAE specifically too, there is a city now being established, it's already established, that is fully dependent on its own solar power. It's called Master City, and it's just a test bed for the different technologies that are being introduced into the country towards the best implementation of technological hardware and building material and building equipment, and how they could be used into how they affect the pollution in the country, or how they impact the pollution in the country. And that's definitely an important aspect that we see happening everywhere too. I'd like to mention also we go to blockchain directly. Blockchain is an important technology that is extremely beneficial, and it's extremely promising for our future. It helps into doing a lot of things, and we're not going to talk about that. But it's important to address the impact, the environment impact of blockchain. And we've all heard about Bitcoin now. Who is interested now in buying Bitcoin or using Bitcoin? Probably everyone, especially now with the surge of prices around Bitcoin. We nevertheless ignore the fact that Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency generated through processing power. So I have 2 laptops. I can generate cryptocurrency on them by using the processing power. I can run an algorithm, and it will, in a matter of time, for example, in a year now, I can generate what is around $100 of Bitcoin on my own laptop. And if we take that a little bit further to the future, we see that we have issues when everyone could be mining Bitcoin on their own computers. Imagine everyone using all of their laptops to mine Bitcoin. How much impact will that do on the environment? And just to give a small example, a small laptop like the ones here, in idle mode, when you're doing your normal activities, it uses 10% of its processing power. So there is 90% which is not used. All right? And if you imagine that we'll be mining Bitcoin probably in the next years on our own devices, it'll have a huge impact on the energy utilization and on the pollution of environment. And that's extremely worrying, and it's something that we haven't spoken about yet, and it's not mentioned even in the news, but it's definitely something that we need to worry about. Another and final thought is that when we are using all of our devices, laptops or computers, etc., it's not something that we can measure. When we talk about, and thank you for the examples, Doctor, from the Facebook data centers, we can measure Facebook data centers utilizations, and we can compare that to percentages or towns, etc. But when we talk about individuals spread all over the world, doing all of that, or utilizing all of this processing power at the same time, the impact is much larger, and definitely something that we need to be aware of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I mean, again, just to those attending and those remote participation, are there any comments, any questions that arise from the speakers so far? Would you like to, please, could you just introduce yourself and raise your question? Thank you.
Sure. Is this working? Yes. Is this better? Okay. I'm Abby Vollmer. I work at a company called GitHub based in San Francisco. I'm just asking this more out of personal interest, though. Just with all of the hype over blockchain and Bitcoin, I'm very intrigued by this point you just brought up, that if everybody's devices are mining Bitcoin, this is going to be a huge environmental impact that we need to think about. Do you know if there are alternatives or any proposal, like anybody who is thinking about that, are there thoughts about, despite the fact that Bitcoin is all about decentralization, like having some sort of centralization to maybe make that more efficient? I don't know enough about blockchain to really know if my question makes perfect sense, but do you get what I'm driving at?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Well, I do get what you mean. The options are quite limited, to be honest, because how do you control what someone does on their own computer? So this is one thing that's definitely uncontrollable. And if we dissect a little bit the process of doing the Bitcoin mining, it happens on a PC. What happens on a PC? What is the source of energy? It's just normal electricity, right? So the person uses a certain device to generate this cryptocurrency, which is worth, for example, $100 in, let's say, 1 year or 1 month, for example. And then he pays, let's say, to do that, he pays $10 in electricity. And we do have a disbalance here. And until that gets settled, we cannot have any control over what a person does on his own devices. That's part of the big problems that we'll probably be trying to face in the next few years. What else can we do? Control what software is running on the PCs is almost impossible. You know that. You're from GitHub, so you do software and code, and that's not possible. We see now a lot of data centers being established just for crypto mining. They don't do services. They don't do like government services, websites, nothing. They just are developed, and you can rent them online just to do mining. And that's definitely something to be answered maybe in the next years.
Thank you very much, Amin. Thank you also for the question. I want to move through our remaining speakers while we have the time, and introduce you, Carolina Guerra, to talk about the situation and projects in the Latin American region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily, Giovanni, and everyone for being here. It's a pleasure. I'm going to try to bring in some kind of a regional perspective of Latin America and the Caribbean, and it's great to have heard the previous approaches from my colleagues, and Sarah bringing in the perspective from the academic perspective. I'm working as a researcher at a university, at a center at the moment, and so, Sarah, I think the idea of bringing about the materiality of ICTs and internet infrastructure is really essential in order to understand where we stand and where can we go and proceed to address this issue. So, firstly, Latin America and the Caribbean, it's a very vast, extensive region which covers, very diverse geographical ecosystems. And it's not the same to be hosting a data center in the city of Sao Paulo or in a city in the middle of the Patagonia, you know? So, I'm just, this is the kind of diversity of landscape I want you to sort of bear in mind when we talk about data and footprint and ICTs in this kind of a very diverse context. And it is also very interesting to know that we are receiving in Latin America a lot of attention from development banks, and there's many studies being coming forward in terms of how to develop the energetic grid, because the region will grow very. It's a region that is vastly consuming energetic resources, and saying it's going greener in terms of using natural resources and not fuel resources. But for example, they are using a lot in Latin America, a lot of hydric energy resources, and we know that rivers and dams, etc., are not, just like ecological per se, producing those kind of that kind of energy from those resources. So. What we see is, in general, in the region, when we are talking about going greener in terms of the process of digitalization, is on the one hand an approach that is very much centered in e-waste management. This has been an agenda that's been on the run since around 2005, 2006. We still see there's a huge impact in this agenda being fostered by, for example, programs from the ITU. And many universities and many nationals and universities in the region are big partners in this e-waste management programs. And so we have many schools of engineering around the region that are sometimes partnering with the ITU or partnering with the local governments, etc., to generate this kind of e-waste factories or recycling programs for computers, smartphones, etc. And this is an approach that is in itself extremely valuable, and we can count like over 20 countries in the region that have those programs at this stage. But it is interesting because this is addressing the material part of technology, but only one small bit, you know, the most visible layer of technology, which is the gadget, which is the computer. So what we are not seeing in the region is what is the impact of data centers, which is basically what is the cloud. Is the cloud in tropical countries, I mean, something that, because you need much more AC, for example, the IXP center in Sao Paulo, I mean, you have so much internet traffic in the city of Sao Paulo. It's a city that has as much internet connectivity and usage as in any major European city in the world. But and so the servers, when you go and look at the offices, so the servers occupy 50% of the bit, and the AC and refrigeration areas, they comprise the other remaining 50% of square meters there. So actually, this is the kind of thinking that technicians and policymakers around these issues have to take into account. And on the other hand, don't we need to have internet infrastructure, IXPs, etc., closer, or CDNs closer to the users for environmental impacts and also for a better internet access? We do. But this has a cost. I mean, in tropical countries and in warm environments, this is a high cost. And I think this is a major policy decision that we need to balance and take into account. And also particularly because in the region, there's an expectation that the demand for energy will grow 80% from 2011 to 2030. But in Central America and the Caribbean, so the hottest areas, this will increase by 120% until 2030. So this is a real challenge. I'm going to leave it here, and then we can sort of address further questions. But I wanted to sort of raise some of the bigger issues.
Yeah, and I'm really aware that for all the speakers and for those in the room, there's so much more that can be said, and this is really just a sort of, you know, getting the conversation started, if you like. Are there any other members from the floor who would like to make a remark or intervene at this stage? If not, then I would like to just introduce our final speaker, last but definitely not least at all. I'm really thrilled to have Sabrina Abu-Alhega, who's our youth representative, on the panel. Sabrina has been associated with several youth associations, organising events that promote youth participation in internet governance issues, including one debate entitled Internet Autonomie, The Internet is Your Friend, last year. So there's a lot more to be said about Sabrina, but I wanted Sabrina, you know, as a representative of youth, and sorry to do this to you, but to really think towards the future. What are the risks if nothing is done? But also perhaps you could reflect on all of the questions, and particularly thinking about the future. What needs to be done? What actions do people need to take? Sabrina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So, first of all, to answer to this question, I will say that I've made a questionnaire survey that was given to youth, a lot of youth, and on this questionnaire was asked if they know what sustainable development means, if they know the impact of digital on the environment, what kind of impact there is, and etc., and so on. And what was very amazing is that the youth in general don't really think that there is a digital impact on the environment. For giving you numbers, it will be better to understand. 36% of the youth that was asking question, and for giving a number of youth, it was like huge amount of youth, maybe 100 youth. 30% that there is no impact at all. Like there is no impact of telephone, of using internet. There is no impact on the environment, which is amazing because I think that we know that there is a huge impact. And on what is most amazing, that 9% think that there is a positive impact of the digital digital environment on the environment. So they think that the impact is positive, which is quite amazing. So when I asked also, but do you think there is a little impact, a huge impact, even if it's negative or positive? Do you think that the level, what level of the impact do you think there is? And for 60%, all of them say, okay, if there is an impact on the environment, the impact is little. So I think there is a lack of awareness on what is a sustainable development of the impact. Also, I say a lot of time impact. Sorry, but of the digitalization of the digital world on the environment, and so on. So to go on what, in my point of view, I think will happen for our future if we don't try to reduce the risk. First of all, I think youth will continue growing and we will continue to live thinking that there is no impact. So the measure that will be taken will be not taken in hand, like there will not very great measure that will be taken. And finally, the disease, global warming that we were talking before, and pollution will just continue to grow without really succeed to have an hand on it. Like for after the Industrial Revolution, there was the threshold of consumption and production exploded. And to take this image, I think that if the digital revolution is not taken in hand, because yes, it can be the next cause of I want to say destruction, and by destruction I mean really like climate changes and all environment, global warming that we know, disease, pollution, and it will just be worse than before. I read a text on the ODGs and OMD, and I saw that for the millennial goals, there was an objective to reduce carbon and emission of carbon and to improve environmental development, but it was not really taking in priority. And then we passed to the ODGs with the idea to take in more consideration on sustainable development, but the reliability and the choice of the indicators that were used are always in question. We used indicators for the objectives, the millennial objectives, that we didn't really change them, or I will not say we, but like there is not really a work on what kind is the indicator really reliable? Do we need more indicator? is the fact that we have too much indicators not helping the objective that we have, and so on. So I think that yes, I think I answered, sorry, but I think that if we don't take it at the first level, I mean the schools level, the elementary level, things will be not really taking, it will be taking in hand too late, I think. And when it's too late, the time to understand, the time to learn, the time to prepare actions, if we take it at the first level, it will be at the end more valuable than taking it at last, and it will serve to nothing. That would be no fun.
Thank you. No, that's very clear.
Thank you.
I think that's. Thank you very much, Sabrina, for those thoughts, and also for going out to your colleagues in the youth environment, if I can say it like that, to ask for their views as well. And just sitting here listening to the remarks of all the panelists, it really does strike me that there are some real themes coming through. Incredibly low level of awareness amongst people about the environmental impact of our online life, the devices, and what we're doing there. But also, as you said, that if we fail to address it, it will become a major global issue if we don't do anything. Sarah, I know that you wanted to come in as well as Carolina. Would anybody else like to? Sarah, please intervene, and then I'll go back to you, Carolina. Thank you.
Thanks for all the remarks. It's really fascinating. And as I suspected, I'm taking many notes. One of the things that I was thinking about in the context of these discussions, it relates to my work on content moderation as well, which is the way in which the vast amount of generation of content has become naturalized to the point that it's not questioned, and there's really just an expectation that it be what it is. And I just want to point out the fact that I think there's value in actually stepping back and examining the relationship that major platforms who solicit user-generated content have to the kinds of environmental impacts that we're talking about. In other words, Facebook has massive data centers not just because. Facebook has massive data centers because it thrives and relies and, in fact, derives revenue from the constant uploading, creation, circulation of user-generated content, which is articulated to the users who create it, on the one hand as being a labor-free process, which I would argue it's not, but also on the other hand, as we've seen, hopefully, and has been demonstrated by the panelists, as an environmentally, at best, environmentally neutral, if not potentially beneficial activity. So my question might be, or my intervention at this point might be, to what extent must we hold the platforms to account for the processes that they have solicited at vast scale in order to generate revenue, while really offsetting so many of the costs. And in my area of concern, that's typically labor related, but of course the environmental piece is there too. So, just another data point. This one I know myself. I didn't have to go ask someone. YouTube alone receives 400 hours of content per minute per day uploaded to its servers. So it relies upon that content, of course, to bring participants to its platform, which it then delivers to its advertisers at great profit. But that 400 hours of content, as we've now seen, manifests through a production chain that we could say begins in the coltan mines, where minerals and rare earth minerals are dug out of the ground. It goes through manufacturing processes in various places in the world, often these special economic zones that are that exist outside of appropriate taxation and environmental regulation schemes. Those labor processes then involve shipping all of those hardware devices and other things to various points in the world. And then, of course, we've talked about the software infrastructure as well. And then at the other end, we have the dismantling of those materials. So the thing that I would just like to raise at this point is that I think we need to have a very significant discussion about denaturalizing the expectation that platforms be able to endlessly profit from the proliferation of the material that they require for their own revenue generation.
Thank you. And for those not in the room and participating online, there's a lot of nodding going on, particularly from the speakers. Carolina, you wanted to raise a point. Also, I'm going to invite again anybody from the room who wants to just raise an issue or make a remark. You're very, very welcome to. Would anybody like to ask for the floor at this stage? Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Raul Plummer. I'm from the Electronic Frontier, Finland. And you started by saying about Bitcoin that everybody wants them, but I don't anymore because they're using vast resources and that's not solved. Yeah. I think the way it looks right now is that it even can't be solved. So unless we actually get a new source of energy, it's going to go on like that. And at the moment, it's already using more energy than 19 countries in Europe, like individually. So I think it's not the currency for the future. There are already other alternatives that use much less energy, and shouldn't really put all our eggs in that basket.
Thank you. I mean, will Bitcoin eat the planet, do you think? And then I've got you as well.
Well, we definitely have a lot to worry about. And it's still a stage where we can act. But then how do you convince people on each sides of the world that we should not mine Bitcoin? And how do you convince regulators to ban Bitcoin? Bitcoin now is worth around $500 trillion, $500 billion. And it's increasing on a daily basis. So tomorrow it'll be 550. A few weeks ago it was around $300 billion. And people are mining, and it's just a matter of cost and benefit. For every person. And a lot of people find if they can mine $10 a day of money, in some countries that's a lot of money. And it brings us back to the same question: how do you convince people? Raising awareness, all right, it's still never enough. It's still not enough. It's still far, and we've seen the statistics on youth specifically. How are we going to enforce such measures? Bitcoin is already here, and it's already worth money, and it's already almost regulated, or more or less, and it's already being enhanced, developed, and adapted for mass scale of people to just use and mine. So I don't see any answers at the moment. What worries? Sorry, I'm taking 30 seconds. What worries me most is that in 10 years we'll actually be less worried about pollution and the environment, and people will all rely will rely on digital currency and mining Bitcoin without any consideration to pollution, and only worry about their own virtual environment, my own social networking page and my own city, which I created online, and I put this VR mask on my head and I live in it. And I'm not okay with that, but I can see that coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Carolina.
Yes, just wanted to raise a small comment related to Sabine's presentation. There's this great paradox as well, stemming from the metaphors around ICTs and the internet and cryptocurrencies and all the technologies that we use based on IP protocols. And that is that we don't understand how this works. And the millennials or the youth, or how do you call now these teenagers? I don't know.
Young people.
They have the new name, whatever, or XYZ generation. Okay, so interestingly enough, these are the people, and Mark Prensky, and there have been several labels to categorize sort of heavy internet users, but these heavy internet users and the youth that spend hours and hours a day on ICTs tend not to understand basic considerations of how technology works. So because they don't understand this, and this has been, these are surveys that we've seen in my region in Latin America coming as well, 16-year-olds who spend 8 hours a day using smartphones or computers, but then they don't understand how that works. I mean, what the internet means, actually how it works. They find it's all immaterial. So least alone we can expect these younger generations, if they don't understand how technology works, to understand then what the impact will be like. So there is really so much to be done there at a literacy level still with the younger generations and with the older ones as well. And finally, policymakers. Once again, I'm very distressed to see development banks in Latin America sort of still aiming to expand the energy grid for more electronic adoption, and looking at still financing e-waste management projects, which it's fine, but not being able to look beyond that. And those were my 2 cents now at this stage. Thank you.
Yes, and to be fair, thank you very much, Carolina. I think that it's probably, the region is not alone in that. I think that, you know, the discussion around environmental issues and environmental impacts of ICTs has not really been as vibrant and taken up, you know, at the same pace as adoption. So Giovanni Seppia, I'm going to give the floor to you, and perhaps I could just ask you also to reflect on, you know, some practical steps. What do you think, even in URID's sphere of operation, what would make a difference if more people did, or more people thought, or more people regulated, or whatever?
Thank you, Emily. Indeed, there are a lot of takes from this workshop today. I've heard the need to generate more awareness of the different generations, not only youth people. So the millennials, whatever you call them. I think it's let's say a need for all generations to be more aware of the environmental impact of the digital environment. At the same time, I think that we should all start to look around ourselves, what we are doing in the daily life from a professional and personal perspective, and see how we can practically contribute to reduce the environmental impact. Not by chance I gave the example of the roll-ups, because they were all around me in the offices. And then you're exposed to that, and you try to find a solution. And I think that we should all not point the fingers at what others do not do, but we should point the fingers at ourselves and say what we can do to reduce the environmental impact of our activities at professional level. And then by doing that, we can contribute to a better environment. And yes, there are data centers, but if you think about data centers, there are different kind of data centers. And in the case of URID, what we have done is, because of the environmental scheme that we have adopted, when we select the data center, we have also some environmental standards that the data center must follow. And this is part of our philosophy of contributing to a greener digital environment. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of let's say consistency, because you must be consistent and never giving up to easy solutions that are at hand, but you may have better solutions from an environmental perspective which are not at hand, but by choosing those solutions you contribute to the environment. And this is what and one practical example of what we are now living this week, this IGF that just started. Honestly, I would have liked the IGF Secretariat, and it's a point that I will make, to be a bit more thoughtful about the environmental impact of this meeting, of all the booths downstairs. There are no rules, no requirements for the booths. I'm sure that at the end there will be tons of wasted materials will be left downstairs. There's no recycling downstairs. So yesterday I was looking for the plastic because we had some plastic, emballage for the things we shipped. Everything is thrown the same basket downstairs. And we were invited to throw it there because for them it's much easier. It's not good. I think that those are the little things that we can do on a daily basis to contribute to our environment. And again, I will make a remark to the Secretary to be more thoughtful about these aspects, because at the end, those are the little things that count and can help us. And then we can talk about Bitcoins, blockchain, and data centers, but we should start from little things and move to the bigger things. But if we don't look at the small things, sometimes, again, there will be no difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that insight into the recycling or lack of it in the UN itself. It's a question of not so much do as I say, but do as I say, not do as I do. Hey? Sabrina, would you like to make any final contribution about next steps, what needs to be done, and practical outcomes?
I think that there is more stakeholders now that pay attention on the environment and try to put in place adequate indicators to monitor the evolution of impacts of internet on the environment, which is not easy to measure, and to bring awareness and information and communication. I think it could be maybe more important to bring this information and communication on risks and bad influence of the internet, because we can bring information and communication to the youth on what is the digital environment, what are sustainable development, but maybe they will be more concerned if they know what are the bad risks and the bad behavior and influences that can come from the internet, even if we know that youth are addict, and I not only youth addict on internet, like it's nowadays everywhere. We can use internet also for open your fridge or your garage at remotely, and so it's very important for everyone. And I think it could be also interesting to reduce the innovation fever, like to maybe innovate is important. I'm sure of that, but maybe take it step by step. Innovate, be concerned of the risk of the new innovation, respond to the risk to introduce good habits and reduce bad impacts, and then think of something else. Maybe it will ralentir. I don't know the slow down. Thanks. The innovation energy, but it will maybe be more healthy for the environment finally. And maybe solutions need to come from the digital actors and firms themselves, and not only from the governments. We always ask politics and governments to respond to questions, to issues that are not really concerned, but not concerned as the firm and digital actors are, and it can bring solutions that are not adapted to the risks. And yes, that was my.
Thank you very much. Would anybody from the room like to take the floor and make any statement or question or raise any issues? Yes, please.
Hi, it's Abby Vollmer from GitHub again. Just wondering, I particularly imagine that Sarah and Carolina may have thoughts on this. For a company like GitHub, which is the world's leading software development platform, so it's where most people go to do their coding, what sort of measures do you think would be most impactful for a company like us trying to think about our environmental footprint with respect to software? And I'm guessing data centers are going to be top of mind, but anything related to that, I'd just be curious to know.
Thank you very much for that question. Carolina, Sarah, any sort of tips? And Amin, you might like to come in from your perspective as Kaspersky as well. Shall I go to Carolina first and then Amin?
I would say that even Giovanni, because he's he has a manager of an internet industry related business, but I would say that, I mean, to try to be consciously aware as an organization of where you stand. I mean, that's we cannot stop the progress of technology, and we cannot stop the progress of innovation, and we cannot say that, and I didn't mention this statistic before, but I mean, cloud-based services, rather than if there was, I've seen a couple of reports coming from the private sector, I must say, not from let's say intergovernmental bodies or research authorities, but they say that cloud-based services reduce the energy consumption by 30%, rather than if we would have that computational capacity in individual computers, sort of in the 1980s, early 1990s model. So, there's a balance there that we have to pay attention as well. I mean, but it's so, okay, we've moved into cloud platforms, and user-generated content work along those lines. So tying it back again, so I think it's just a matter of I mean, you're in a, going back to my experience in a continent with so much sharp contrast, and what it takes down to cool down a data center. So in San Francisco, you are very well located. I mean, you serve a global community, I would say, but you're very well located in terms of trying to find a place where maybe you won't spend as many resources in cooling down or heating your environment to maintain servers in a good fashion. But I think that Giovanni's recommendations in terms of looking at an office, at an organization, is those are my comments.
Thank you very much.
We're running out of time.
We've sort of got minus a minute, but are there any quick, urgent, like really, really sharp sort of practical responses?
I mean, I would just say having an enterprise level environmental plan and assessment would be an important place to start. And also I would urge transparency around that. And, firms are interested in market differentiation and having a financial upside to their activities. And I would say that would be one way to propose it within your organization.
Yeah, I can only subscribe what Sarah and Carolina just said. And I would recommend also, if you like, and if you have the resources at different levels, the CO2 official compensation process for your carbon footprint. It's an incredible useful exercise also from a security perspective, because it helps your company to be, let's say from a security perspective, labor office related business continuity more in line with the international standards, not only to compensate the CO2, but it's a very good exercise for a good environmental planning.
I think there may well be more tips, and perhaps we can talk in the margins, but I have to bring the session, I'm sorry, to a close. Thank you. I'd really like to say a heartfelt thank you to all of our speakers today for really fascinating and insightful remarks and contributions. I hope this is the start of a conversation that continue and can pervade these internet discussions on other issues as well, with environmental awareness. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to those in the room for your participation as well.
Thank you, Emily.
How are you doing? Fine, all fine? The boys stand now.
Did you give him the
No, not yet. We're negotiating the mobile phone now. Which in Italy is very tough, because they give to the boys and girls at 8. And he still doesn't have. Try to make it 12. They say, no, I will give it to you at 12.
Sorry to interrupt. Before everybody runs off, may I ask for a picture of the panel?
Yeah,
Thank you.